It is said that in the spring of 1959, a few locals in Friedberg, Germany, gathered around the window of a small club, half concealed by the shadows cast by dim street lamps. Inside, they heard a gentle strum of a guitar floating through the smoky room, accompanied by a voice so mesmerizing that it could quiet even the most restless soul. It might have been enough just to admire the sound, but what astonished them most was the man singing, an American GI with a polite smile, warm eyes, and a hint of loneliness in his expression. Whispers spread about how he effortlessly commanded attention, not with the stern bark of a hardened officer, but with a curious mix of humility and star power that radiated from his every move. That soldier was Elvis Presley. Even now, people still ask what might have become of him had he answered a different calling, forging a deeper path in the military, rather than returning to the electric spotlight of the stage. Would this young man from Tupelo, Mississippi, already an icon in the making, have emerged as a formidable military leader? Or would his gentle nature have pulled him in another direction entirely? These questions, though largely speculative, hint at a life shaped by duty and devotion, weighed against the pull of fame and the needs of a restless creative spirit. Elvis Aaron Presley was born on January 8, 1935, in Tupelo, Mississippi, to Gladys and Vernon Presley. He was a twin, but his brother Jesse Guerin was stillborn, an event that etched a profound sense of loss and destiny into the family's emotional landscape. Economic hardships ran deep. Tupelo in the 1930s was far from prosperous, and the Presleys struggled in a small house that barely sheltered them from the uncertainties of life. Vernon scraped by on intermittent jobs, and Gladys worked diligently to provide whatever stability she could for her adored only child. From their humble beginnings, Elvis absorbed the rhythms and stories drifting through that corner of the South, the same place where gospel choirs blended with blues chords on balmy summer nights. The child grew into a wide-eyed boy who listened avidly to both church music and the local radio, his ears forever attuned to a mix of spiritual longing and earthly struggles. By all accounts, Elvis was a gentle, quiet kid with a peculiar intensity. Teachers sometimes observed his wandering imagination, which sparked whenever he heard a melody, whether in church or on the family's battered radio. He'd come home from Sunday services humming the tunes for hours, as if they were etched into his soul. Early signs of a special gift began to show when he was still quite young. He would sometimes stand in front of small gatherings and attempt to project the gospel fervor he had soaked in. This precocious display of musical talent sparked curiosity in some neighbors, but scorn in others, who found his style uncomfortably different from the more subdued singing they were used to. Through these experiences, Elvis developed a quiet resilience. He felt a sense of otherness that made him protective of those who, like him, were marginalized, teased, or misunderstood. In 1948, when the Presleys moved to Memphis, Tennessee, they hoped for better job prospects and a bit of breathing room in a larger city. What Elvis discovered instead was an electrifying musical world waiting to be explored. On the streets near Beale, artists of various ethnic backgrounds performed a fusion of blues and soul, forging new sounds in crowded clubs and street corners. Elvis would often linger outside, soaking in every note, picking up a riff here and a vocal run there, weaving them into his own interpretations. At school, he stood out for his devoted interest in music and the slightly flashy sense of style he was beginning to cultivate. Even then, he demonstrated a form of leadership, though it wasn't the traditional commanding brand people associate with a future officer. Rather, it manifested in his ability to captivate friends, bringing them together in spontaneous jam sessions, or coaxing them to listen more carefully to the music that inspired him. From the outside, it might not have appeared as a foundation for a military career, but the spark of empathy, determination, and single-minded focus was already there. His foray into professional music took shape in 1954 when he stepped into Sun's studio, introduced to producer Sam Phillips. The earliest tracks he recorded, including That's All Right, held an explosive energy. Elvis's style blurred lines between R&B country and a fervent gospel subtext. This caught the attention of local radio stations first, and soon the rest of the nation was transfixed by the scandalous hip movements and fiery vocals that would define him as a cultural phenomenon. Fame descended rapidly, turning Elvis into the biggest name in rock and roll by the mid-1950s. His voice, his posture, and his entire persona became emblematic of a youth-driven cultural revolution. But for all the excitement, new challenges came in tow. He faced relentless media scrutiny, moral outrage from conservative corners, and a schedule that never let up. Just when it seemed he was unstoppable, a notice arrived from the U.S. government. Elvis Presley had been drafted into the Army. In many ways, the timing appeared preposterous. The biggest star in America, possibly in the world, was expected to trade in his microphone for standard issue fatigues. For a while, people speculated about whether Elvis might receive a cushy assignment, whether his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, might finagle a special arrangement that allowed him to keep performing and entertaining troops without truly serving. After all, in the world of show business, it was not unheard of for influential figures to escape frontline duties. But Elvis surprised everyone by insisting he would serve like any other draftee with no preferential treatment. Behind the scenes, Colonel Parker likely saw an opportunity to polish Elvis's image, making him seem more wholesome and more universally acceptable. But Elvis himself later indicated that he believed in fulfilling his obligations, if only to prove to himself and to his critics that he wasn't above responsibility to his country. He was inducted on March 24, 1958, and sent to Fort Hood, Texas for basic training. The transition was abrupt. This was a young man used to a swirl of fans, bright lights, and an entourage dedicated to meeting his every need. Now each morning he lined up at dawn for roll call. Sergeants barked orders. Tasks ranged from cleaning latrines to completing physically demanding exercises. And nightly free time was often spent alone in the barracks or quietly strumming a guitar when no one else objected. Yet, interestingly, Elvis adapted. Accounts from fellow recruits suggest he displayed surprising humility, helping clean, offering cigarettes or small kindnesses to those struggling with military routines, and doing his best not to draw undue attention to himself. He occasionally had to brace himself against stares or whispered comments, some of them from admirers, some from envious peers. But on the whole, training went fairly smoothly. The Army recognized his presence posed unique challenges. Some officers tried to ensure his safety or keep away the press, and from time to time, that included minor exceptions to standard procedure. But Elvis made it a point to participate in as many standard duties as possible, from kitchen patrol to physical drills. He didn't relish formal authority. He was, after all, a private, then a private first class, but he possessed a natural magnetism. In moments when tension arose among recruits, he would sometimes step in with a calm word or a quick joke. That understated approach endeared him to many and could have, had he pursued a long-term military path, blossomed into a more official leadership role. Although it's easy to focus on his iconic silhouette in performance, it's also worth recognizing that Elvis had a sort of deep empathy that others in his unit found comforting, a trait that can be essential to forging strong camaraderie in times of crisis. As the year drew on, Elvis faced heartbreaking news. His beloved mother Gladys passed away in August 1958. The Army granted him emergency leave to return home, but the emotional blow was devastating. Elvis had always shared a uniquely close bond with Gladys. She was, in many ways, the single greatest emotional anchor in his life. Some of the color in his personality seemed drained after her death. He returned to Fort Hood a changed man, more subdued, his laughter less spontaneous and his demeanor tinged with grief. Despite this immense personal pain, he held steady. Training continued, and he did not attempt to withdraw from his duties or seek special privileges for mourning. This stoic persistence, as recounted by a few of the men who served alongside him, only heightened their respect for him. It was an unspoken testament to the discipline he was learning. The Army's routine may have helped stabilize him, giving him a concrete structure at a time when his world seemed to be in chaos. In October 1958, he was shipped off to West Germany, assigned to the 1st Medium Tank Battalion, 32nd Armor, 3rd Armored Division in Friedberg. This deployment came during the Cold War, a period of tense standoff between NATO forces and the Soviet bloc, although actual combat in the region never ignited. In a sense, this was Elvis's front line, but it was a front line of vigilance and readiness rather than active battle. Nonetheless, it was a world away from recording studios and glittering stages. Day in and day out, he was expected to maintain equipment, participate in drills, and remain ever ready in case the geopolitical climate took a darker turn. He received mail from adoring fans worldwide, but he was also, in the eyes of the Army, a soldier like any other. There were no enthralling performances each night, only the humdrum routine of wiping down rifles, carrying out tank maintenance, or bunking in cramped quarters with men who wanted to treat him like one of their own. It was here, in Germany, that Elvis formed relationships that would shape much of his personal life. Most famously, he met a young teenager named Priscilla Beaulieu, whose stepfather was stationed with the Air Force. Their relationship, begun under the watchful eyes of guardians, would later develop into a marriage that lasted from 1967 to 1973 and resulted in the birth of their daughter, Lisa Marie. The extreme age gap and the circumstances of their meeting remain controversial topics, even decades later. In the broader context of Elvis's life, this relationship became emblematic of how his private world was often out of sync with conventional norms, and how his stardom allowed him to forge personal connections that stirred debate for years to come. Life overseas did not spare Elvis from controversies and rumors. While the Army tried to show he was being treated the same as any soldier, tabloids speculated that he was receiving preferential lodging, better meals, and lighter duties. Others labeled it a publicity ploy by Colonel Parker to capitalize on Elvis's all-American boy image. Among the troops, reactions varied. Some rolled their eyes, believing that no matter how many chores he did, Presley would always be singled out for special treatment. Others respected the fact that he was dealing with the intense glare of celebrity under conditions far more restricted than the typical Hollywood star could endure. Though he never led a unit in combat or enacted groundbreaking strategies, the 2 years Elvis spent in the Army revealed a moral fortitude and a sense of loyalty. It would have been easy, perhaps even tempting, for him to take the easy path and remain in the spotlight with an entertainment unit. Instead, he allowed himself to be molded by the military environment. Some might argue that these choices laid the foundation for a more disciplined approach to his post-Army career. However, that discipline began to fray in later years, partly because of the intense pressure his star status put upon him when he returned to civilian life. Still, in these quieter months abroad, he demonstrated that beneath the stage persona was a man capable of empathy, perseverance, and a willingness to serve a cause greater than himself, even if he never faced the test of actual warfare. When he returned to the United States in March 1960, Elvis held the rank of sergeant. He was honorably discharged and quickly ushered back into the entertainment industry. Most fans were thrilled, clamoring to see what he would do next. At first glance, his return seemed triumphant. A hero's welcome, numerous interviews, and new recording sessions that capitalized on his military service to present a more mature and refined Elvis. Yet in private, he grappled with the new reality of a changed musical landscape. Rock and roll was evolving, driven by new artists, and his time away had allowed others to seize the spotlight. Colonel Parker, anxious to keep Elvis's momentum going, directed him toward film after film, light-hearted musicals that raked in money but drew criticism for their lack of substance. The rebellious Elvis of the 1950s, with his raw performances and innovative merging of genres, was replaced by a more domesticated version, one carefully packaged to appeal to mainstream audiences and families. Despite the glitter and success of these Hollywood ventures, some close friends noticed that Elvis yearned for deeper fulfillment. The Army years had given him a structured environment and a sense of belonging to a cohesive group, even if briefly. Show business, on the other hand, was cutthroat and relentless. Some nights he seemed introspective, lost in thought about what life would have been like had he pursued a more serious commitment in the armed forces. He would never express regret for re-entering the music world. Performing was in his blood, but he recognized he'd left behind a life that, in its rigid demands and shared experiences, had given him a measure of normalcy. Over time, the emotional toll of show business began to wear on him. His love for Priscilla was tested by long separations and intense public scrutiny, though they married in a highly publicized ceremony in 1967. Fame kept them in a fishbowl, observed and judged at every turn. Even as he churned out movies and records, Elvis found moments to engage in quieter acts of kindness. People close to him relate stories of his spontaneous generosity, buying new appliances for strangers, donating money to hospitals, or paying off debts for friends he felt needed a lifeline. Although much of this went unpublicized, Colonel Parker tended to focus on big marketing ploys rather than Elvis's philanthropic gestures. Those who benefited from his kindness remembered a man who, despite the demands of stardom, never forgot the value of helping others. Perhaps it was an outgrowth of his poor upbringing, or maybe it reflected the empathetic traits that surfaced during his service years. Regardless, it offered a glimpse of his moral compass, one that guided him to lift others even while he privately wrestled with the enormity of his own celebrity. The 1960s slid into the 1970s, and Elvis's life took on new complexity. The Beatles and other British invasion bands had upended the music industry, becoming the new idols of the younger generation. Meanwhile, Elvis's popular but sometimes formulaic movies stopped resonating with audiences in the same way. By the late 1960s, he staged a dramatic comeback with a television special in 1968, widely referred to as the 68 Comeback Special, that reminded everyone of his raw talent. Leather-clad, guitar in hand, he performed with an intensity that critics had thought he had lost. If there was a spark left, the special proved it. Over the next few years, he started performing live concerts again, eventually settling into a series of Las Vegas residencies that became legendary for their spectacle and star power. Unfortunately, the rigors of performing, often 2 shows a night, in combination with personal emotional struggles, began to erode his physical and mental well-being. He and Priscilla divorced in 1973, and he drifted further into the use of prescription medications to manage pain, anxiety, and insomnia. Those closest to him worried about the relentless cycle he was trapped in, pushing his body to extremes on stage, then relying on pills to rest, only to repeat the process night after night. Though never widely publicized in his lifetime, his addiction issues grew more severe. He became prone to mood swings and erratic behavior, overshadowing the calmer persona he had honed during his Army service. Still, even then, when asked about his time in the military, Elvis spoke with pride, remembering how it tested him and shaped his perspective. Some younger fans who knew only the flamboyant Vegas suits might have been surprised to see photos of a cropped-haired Elvis wearing dog tags and living in Spartan conditions. But for older fans and veterans, that 2-year slice of his life stood as proof that he was more than a rock and roll rebel. He was also an American who, called upon to serve, did so without complaint and without seeking special privilege. While it doesn't place him alongside great generals or famed war heroes, this chapter of his life carries its own moral significance. It highlights the complexity of Elvis as a man, an artist who yearned to please audiences, a loyal son undone by the loss of his mother, and a patriotic individual whose sense of duty quietly coexisted with his massive cultural impact. On August 16, 1977, Elvis was found unresponsive at Graceland and pronounced dead soon afterward. The cause was heart failure, likely related to his extensive use of prescription drugs. The world responded in shock and grief. It seemed impossible that the man who so thoroughly defined an era could be gone at just 42. Thousands of fans converged upon Graceland in the days that followed, transforming the grounds into a site of pilgrimage. Amid the tributes to his musical legacy, there were also reminders of the soldier he had once been. Veterans and active duty personnel recounted the peculiar memory of seeing the king in uniform, and older fans spoke of how their parents had once questioned his rebelliousness, but admitted respect for his willingness to serve. In the decades since, Elvis's cultural significance has only grown. Graceland stands as one of the most visited homes in America, second only to the White House. Museums, exhibits, and books continue to explore every facet of his life, from the chords he strummed to the relationships he cherished and lost. And while the majority of focus remains on his music and film career, there's a quiet reverence in certain circles for his Army service, an acknowledgement that he represented, if only briefly, the thousands of young Americans who left home to face the unknown. Though he did not endure the crucible of battlefield combat, his presence in uniform offered reassurance to a post-war American public. It signaled that fame did not necessarily excuse one from duty, and that service in its many forms could be undertaken with sincerity and humility. Over time, newly revealed letters and first-hand accounts from soldiers who trained or served alongside Elvis shed a bit more light on his demeanor in Germany. One man recalled how Elvis quietly turned away a group of autograph seekers in the mess hall so the other soldiers could eat without disturbance, only to sign pictures later in private when no one was inconvenienced. Another recollection tells of an officer noticing Elvis walking the perimeter late at night, humming softly to himself, perhaps a gospel tune, as if music were still the one thing that brought him peace and kept him tethered to home. These intimate stories paint a portrait quite unlike the roaring crowds at concerts or the frantic scenes at red carpets. Instead, they show a simple reality: a young man in uniform, battered by personal grief and the demands of a stratospheric career, finding quiet moments of solace in the routine of guard duty or the strum of a battered guitar. In the years following his death, tributes from fellow performers and from people who had served with him reflected a spectrum of opinions. Some were awestruck by his decision to serve at all, given the allure of stardom and the possibility of special treatment. Others criticized the army for enabling the press coverage that made Elvis a darling of patriotic American families. Nevertheless, the overarching sentiment was one of admiration. Even if he hadn't led men into battle, or devised brilliant strategies, or faced the horrors of war, he had touched the hearts of his fellow recruits and the public at a time when the draft was a tangible reality for many. Many older Americans who had once worried about his scandalous music warmed up to him after seeing photos of him saluting or hearing stories of his no-frills dedication in Germany. Even now, reading through diaries and recollections of that time in Germany adds dimension to the Elvis narrative. Rather than just memorizing the hits or imitating his dance moves, fans and historians alike glean a sense of a man grappling with the boundaries of stardom. He was no swashbuckling military hero. He didn't earn medals for valor in combat. But in that comparatively brief window, he showcased a different kind of valor, one of consistency, humility, and grace under the massive weight of expectation. His public image was shaped not just by signature songs, but also by snapshots of him loading gear alongside his fellow soldiers, tossing out wisecracks to lighten the mood, and writing heartfelt letters home that revealed his longing for family. As we near the end of this reflection, it's worth reiterating, Elvis Presley's reputation is, above all else, that of a legendary performer who revolutionized music. Still, his time in the Army remains one of the most fascinating detours in popular culture, revealing a man wrestling with duty and ambition, heartbreak, and hope. It brings into sharper focus the complicated relationship between celebrity and the responsibilities of citizenship. Yes, many aspects of his life spark debate. His relationship with Priscilla, the way he embraced African American musical styles, the extravagance of his later years, and the tragic spiral of prescription drug abuse that contributed to his early death. Yet none of these complexities negate the quieter achievements of that soldier, who, for a short window, understood all too well the meaning of sacrifice and self-restraint. If you've enjoyed this exploration, there are countless other stories of historical figures, some famous, some nearly forgotten, whose lives intertwined with the call to serve. Perhaps you'd like to learn about other celebrities who unexpectedly found themselves in combat zones, or the remarkable journeys of soldiers who developed surprising civilian talents once they hung up their uniforms. These moments of convergence remind us that everyone, no matter their background, can be tested by responsibility and shaped by empathy. So consider subscribing and following along for more deep dives into the human stories that lie behind the headlines and iconic photos. In Elvis's case, the photo of a smiling young man in uniform is more than just a novelty. It's a window into a profound and, at times, harrowing personal journey. Through that lens, we glimpse an individual who navigated stardom, loss, devotion to duty, and the universal search for meaning, leaving behind an extraordinary legacy that still resonates in the quiet chords of a guitar.